Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And here we are, another season, another theme with the Chameleons Bloom podcast. As our community continues to blossom and bloom, I've decided to center this season around the topics of diversity and community. TCB, the Chameleons Bloom, has become such a diverse community, so why not make this season all about that? Season 3 will not only cover the topic of cultural diversity, but we'll also cover a general garden full of diverse topics that affect the Muslim community in one way or another. What does that entail? Well, grab your cup of Halal Goodness and join us for this season with your host, Khadija. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, so today I have with me my bestie in Islam, and that is Fatima. Today we're going to be talking about what does love for the sake of Allah mean to us. So the topic will be love for the sake of Allah. What does it mean? What does it not mean? And yeah, so let's just get started. Assalamu alaikum, sissy.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Welcome. So, can you just what did you say? Jazakallah khair. Wayaki. So, can you just give us like a quick little intro about yourself? If the chameleons don't already know, but you guys should know. But if you're new here, give a little quick intro about yourself.
Sure, inshallah. So I have been Muslim 9 years, alhamdulillah.
Oh, mashallah.
I said
it was 9 years?
Yeah, it was 9 years.
Mashallah.
I said my shahada in college and I was with you. Sister Khadija. Mashallah.
Alhamdulillah.
Actually not probably, you are my longest lasting friend in Islam, alhamdulillah. So, and
yeah,
honestly,
you are too, actually.
In general, in my life, probably because I don't really have a lot of the friendships I had from before. So, alhamdulillah.
Yeah. You're definitely one of mine too. Alhamdulillah.
So I studied art a lot growing up and stuff. So I started an art degree. That's what I was going to college for when we met and everything. And then I eventually switched, after I got married, I switched over to Islamic studies and I got my degree. I finished it this summer, alhamdulillah, in Islamic studies, or Islamic education. And then, inshallah, I'm not really sure what plan.
So proud of you. You're going to be the resident teacher for TCB. For TCB. You'll answer our fatwas. Actually, you should give some classes maybe for new Muslims or something.
Yeah, inshallah.
And we can have a sort of a database where you just upload pre-record the videos, or just useful. Yeah, I think that would be so good. We'll talk about that after, inshallah. All right, so let's get started. Bismillah. Okay, so today we're talking about love for the sake of Allah. So what does that mean to you subjectively? Every episode, if we're talking about a topic, I like to define what it means first, whether it be by the dictionary or to us subjectively. So obviously we can't really find what love for the sake of Allah means in the dictionary. So what does it mean to you subjectively?
So I was really thinking a lot about this, and the biggest thing that I kind of thought of that everything sort of fell under in my perspective was that it all has to do with having hisn or thinking good or thinking well about each other and assuming the best. So even if we're advising someone, we still should be assuming the best of them if we're loving them for the sake of Allah. And we're also if we love someone for the sake of Allah, then that we should also be working on ourselves based on what they tell us. It also means being patient and kind and forgiving with our Muslim brothers and sisters.
Yes.
And also even when it's the key of it for me was even when it's hard for you, that we should still be trying to seek Allah's pleasure in that whatever we're doing with that person.
100%.
And as long as that's not harmful to ourselves, obviously, we're not going out of our way to please someone. Right. We're doing it at the end of the day for the sake of Allah. So we shouldn't be losing sleep and, not doing acts of worship to help someone or things like that.
Right. Or putting ourselves through like mental distress.
Yeah, which definitely I've probably done in the past.
I think I have too, actually.
Yeah. So what about you? Like, what would you define it as?
What's about
subjectively?
I think, okay, so for me, love for the sake of Allah to me means that you cultivate, actually it's like going off of what you said, like cultivating a sincere and meaningful friendship with the intentions of pleasing Allah alone. So that means like putting aside the ego and recognizing that, my friend or anybody is human and flawed like myself, and then I should overlook bad habits and faults and be patient with them. And also keeping in mind like that I'm doing it for the sake of Allah. So I have to make sure that, it's sincere and it's not like I'm not doing something out of like I'm not doing something like saying it's for the sake of Allah, but it's really like for my own personal gain. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And also like, that being said, I have to like also, of course, that being said, like, I also need to exercise boundaries and, just because you love someone for the sake of Allah, it doesn't mean like you overstep your boundaries, your own boundaries, and you let people take advantage of you. You know what I mean?
That's so true. That really ties in with
it really does, right?
About.
I was gonna say, please refer to the Boundaries podcast, episode 3. I don't know when we're gonna like release this one, but check out podcast episode 3 on boundaries for more. Okay, so we're pretty much like on the same page with that. Okay, so what does it actually mean in the light of Islam, love for the sake of Allah? What were your findings?
So I found that it's really important as a foundation of our society, as of Muslim society in general, and that it really allows the Muslims to have a strong bond with each other. So it was really interesting to me to think about how if we don't have that, and it shows it really amplifies the divisions that we find in the Muslim community.
Yeah, you nailed it.
I was reading, and it was a hadith that Ahmad narrated, that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Indeed, the strongest bond of faith is to love for the sake of Allah and to hate for the sake of Allah." And this is a Hasan hadith, but it still, I think, applies in this context of it really strengthens the bond when we love for the sake of Allah. And also it's an act of worship. So we don't always think about that necessarily. Like, we're like, okay, I'm going to go hang out with my friends. I love them for the sake of Allah. But it's actually like you're actually doing an act of worship when you're loving this person for the sake of Allah. And Allah loves you for doing that. And that's like one of the things I was thinking about, is that the answer, like when someone says, I love you for the sake of Allah, and then you say, may he for whose sake you love me, love you. So like you're asking, like it's basically a dua that Allah will love that person because they love you.
Wow.
For his sake, subhanAllah. So
that's nice.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that.
A nice thing. Like it's actually like you're doing an act of worship. So and I think that's also like something where we need to make sure that we have our intentions correct then, because it's an act of worship.
Oh wow, 100%.
There was an interesting thing I was also reading, and this was another hadith. I didn't actually have that whole hadith, but it talks about how when we help Muslims with what they need, it's actually more important than secluding ourselves in worship. So like and it says that for people who do that, they will be under Allah's shade on the day when there will be no shade. So basically on the day of judgment.
We need that shade. We need that shade in this dunya. Like, can you imagine on the day of judgment?
Sure.
SubhanAllah, man. Crazy. Okay, so let me add. Okay, so going off of what you said also, you have to do so. Like, what does it actually mean in the light of Islam? Doing anything with sincere intentions for the sake of Allah. It's so important. Like, that should be the core catalyst of all of our actions, which obviously, like, it's easier said than done, What does it actually mean in the light of Islam? So, like, sincere intentions. We need to know what for the sake of Allah truly means, and recognizing and internalizing like La ilaha illallah, because that's basically what for the sake of Allah is. Being fully aware of the oneness of Allah and doing things to confirm your understanding and belief in that oneness, you know?
Yes.
Also found some references that I wanted to share. There was one, I have to read it. Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, may Allah have mercy on him. So like Imam Hanbali, was asked about love for the sake of Allah. And he said, it is that you not love him for the sake of some worldly benefit. SubhanAllah. So it shows that you're not just doing something for your own personal gain. And another one is the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, Allah Almighty said, my love is a right upon those who love each other for my sake. My love is a right upon those who visit each other for my sake. My love is a right upon those who sit together for my sake. My love is a right upon those who maintain relations for my sake. Musnad Ahmed Sahih, according to Al-Arnaut.
The same one in my notes too. That's really good, Michelle. Yeah,
I really love that one. And it just really ties back to what you were just saying. Like, you're doing everything for the sake of Allah. Like, everything you're doing, it just ties back to like why you're doing it, for whom you're doing it. You know, I think that's really beautiful. It's really hard, I think, to keep that in mind sometimes, but you know, obviously we just have to consistently remind ourselves and keep ourselves in check. That's why self-reflection and self-awareness is so important, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about ready to get into this next this next like question or whatever topic.
Yeah.
Give examples of what love for the sake of Allah is not. I've got a full long list. You can go first.
Okay, I had one like main thing, and then I'm sure that we'll both have opinions about some other things.
Yeah, based on our own personal experiences.
One of the things that I see a lot that people try to claim is loving for the sake of Allah is when they're like judging people, especially like new Muslims online and stuff. And they're just like, I'm gonna like advise them. And then it's usually like in the comments of a video or something. And they're like, why is your hair showing? Is this a filter? Why are you wearing makeup?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, sister, I love you for the sake of Allah. That's why I told you that.
Oh my gosh. Please, everybody listening right now, take note. Please take notes. Can you repeat that again, Fatima? Repeat it again.
Oh, so when they try to advise someone, air quotes, like advise them, that they're doing something wrong. Usually it's a woman doing their hijab or they want to criticize something. A lot of times it's someone who just became Muslim and they say, I'm advising you because I love you for the sake of Allah.
Like,
it's
that's
honestly
humorous.
Like comical. Yeah,
it is. I'm laughing. Like, I actually find it humorous.
I'm laughing, but it's also like really sad because the person receiving those comments a lot of times doesn't understand that the person giving them is totally wrong.
Yes. And like, I really think that they need to realize, like, what does love for the sake of Allah actually mean? Like, when you're advising, especially when you're advising, like, what do you mean by that? If you're going to say, I love you for the sake of Allah, like, that's why I'm advising you. Like, what does that mean? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah.
And they don't realize, I mean, the person advising, but also the person who's receiving the advice, if they're like a new Muslim, they may not even understand like what Tawheed really means yet. Exactly. Or they may not understand like very basic things because they're just excited to wear a headscarf to identify themselves as a Muslim.
Yes. So that's exactly so true.
Crushing that excitement and just,
and they're just gonna feel like bullied.
Yeah, and it definitely happens in person because I mean, like, social media wasn't as big of a thing when we converted.
Oh yeah,
I feel like. Sure. And so, but there were still sisters who would, you know, give that advice. And then be like, you know, I love you for the sake of Allah.
Oh my gosh, I'm not even gonna lie. I think I was one of those, like, astaghfirullah, like, may Allah forgive me.
I think we both were a little bit.
We definitely were. I definitely was one of those.
I think that's also part of, like, I mean, this is a lot of new Muslims fall into, is like that zealous phase
Exactly.
before they really understand what love for the sake of Allah means.
Yes, and we were like new Muslims, and we were ignorant as well. Like, you know.
Yeah.
So
it's this idea of like, and this is not just converts to Islam. Like, there's actually studies about it, like converts to a lot of religions or things like that. It's like people who come in, or people who even find like new hobbies will come in and they're so like overzealous about it that they're like want to tell everyone. Like, and then even you vegans, feel that love. Like,
vegans is actually a really good example.
Yeah, that's
like
true.
The new vegans, like they just want to force it on you that like you need to be vegan. This lifestyle is amazing for you. Like you have to do it. Yeah.
I felt like, you know, well, from my perspective, it was kind of that feeling of like Islam is so amazing for me. Like, how could you not want to do it perfectly?
Mine too. Right.
So, and then you're like, these people who are born Muslim, why are they not?
Yes,
the XYZ,
or even like the new
and you don't understand at all that like the cultural baggage, all the stuff that goes into it. Like, so 100%. Yeah, it's difficult. This is something that I've myself have to like not fall into, because I feel like it's where you start out with the right intention of doing something, and then you just go into it continuously, like trying, because you're trying to help someone, for example. So then you just feel guilty because you aren't able to help them to the extent that you want, and you're not really helping them anymore for the sake of Allah. You're just doing it because you agreed to in the first place, and you feel like, I just have to keep doing it because this is what I said I would do.
Right.
So I feel like that can happen a lot with, a lot of times there's sisters or brothers in the community that often need help or something. So you help them for the sake of Allah, and then sometimes they have, mental health struggles, or they have other things that they're staying in that pattern they can't get out of, whatever, and you feel like you have to help them, but you lose sight of why you're helping them.
Yes. Oh, that's so true.
And so I think that has affected me in the past before, and you end up losing a lot of barakah, I feel like, if you lose sight of your reasoning.
Yeah, I feel like
you're doing it for the sake of Allah.
I definitely feel like some of the sisters that I met before who are like trying to support me and be there for me, like that definitely happened. Yeah, I really understand that.
And similar to like a burnout kind of that you get in professional settings.
For sure. And then like obviously like with time, like your relationship changes too, like the dynamics of their friendship changes. Like you grow either one way and they grow another way, and you guys just don't see eye to eye anymore. That's definitely happened to me a lot. Okay, so let me dive in here and let me share my experiences, because I've got a lot. Okay, so well, it's kind of sad, but okay, so for me, let me give examples of what love for the sake of Allah is not.
Yes.
So okay, love for the sake of Allah is not doing things expecting a payback. So whether it be from Allah or from others. Okay, so actually, the examples that I'm giving is actually based off of my personal experience. Like I've been like this before, and I feel like, it's important that it's important that I don't ever paint myself to be like some self-righteous Muslimah who's got life like figured out, and I'm just like, I know what I'm doing, because I don't. So I'm sharing these examples because I've been through it and I've done it before. So, and I recognize that this is not what love for the sake of Allah is. Also, like the examples that I'm providing, sisters have done it to me. So
yeah, same. I feel like,
right. So I'm sharing like just from personal experiences. Obviously, like I think that personal experiences are more relatable for us. So
I agree.
And I just definitely don't want people thinking like, oh, she thinks she's like so righteous. But no, this is like, I've been through it. So I'm just sharing what I've learned. So for, like I said, love for the sake of Allah is not doing things expecting a payback, whether it be from Allah or from others. I've been through this before. So, yeah. And I actually think that like, why it's so important to rectify ourselves when we become Muslim is because of all the like things that we learned in the past, like from society, from our upbringing, from our previous religions, whatever. Like it bleeds into like your conversion to Islam. You know what I mean? So you sort of bring that mentality in with you if you don't really learn how important it is to basically like unlearn everything from the past, you know?
Yeah.
So
I totally agree.
That being said, I feel like I had this kind of mentality before because like before Islam, it was always like, okay, I'm not going to help you unless you help me. Like, you know what I mean? So it was very like transactional. So I
know a lot of people that do that too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because we don't actually know like how much harm it causes, and we don't know we're doing it because we don't reflect on ourselves. So it's really important to self-reflect all the time. But this is what I was doing before, like with the whole term, like love for the sake of Allah. Like I was sort of thinking like, okay, if I'm doing something for the sake of Allah, like I shouldn't be doing it with the mentality like I'm doing this for Allah, so He should reward me or He should give me this or that. Like no, so wrong. Like, you know.
Yeah, I always thought like I should never want to get anything for doing something. Like that's how my mom was like taught us basically. Like you should just do it because you're supposed to as a human.
Yeah, like and that's so good.
When it was like,
but that's good
like,
though.
It's good, but you should still like you can still like want to be rewarded by Allah. And like I had a really hard time getting like that concept.
No, I think that's like what I'm saying here is that you shouldn't do something for the sake of Allah, like hoping or like depending that like Allah is gonna give you back something. Do you know what I mean? Like you shouldn't.
No,
like,
you do it like hoping is the right word. Just depending on it is definitely the wrong way.
Yeah. Okay, hoping that Allah will reward you. Yeah. Okay, but no, I'm saying like for me though.
Yeah.
Like I'll use an example. Like for example, like if I do this for the sake of Allah, Allah better like give me something. Like this kind of mentality is wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, more common like I see people where they're like, not Allah should give me something, but also you owe me something because I did something for you. That's very common. I see a lot.
So that payback kind of mentality, like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think like you should be doing something for the sake of Allah because you love Allah and you want Him to be pleased with you. That should just be it. Yes. Like it should stop there. Whether Allah rewards you for it or not, like that shouldn't be your driving factor. Do you know what I mean? You should be the driving factor should be you love Allah. You're doing it for Allah because you want Him to be pleased with you. If He rewards you, alhamdulillah, like that's bonus. That's great. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that like when you get that like connection with understanding about Tawheed, like you get to understand more about the relationship of like loving Allah and like Allah loving you and what that really entails, and that like just having Allah's pleasure with you is a reward.
Yeah, exactly. Because like honestly, we can't see if Allah is going to reward us. Like we won't see that in this life. So you know what I mean? Like, okay, I'm doing something for the sake of Allah and like He better reward me. Like you're not going to see that now. Like you will not see that now. And you can't even play that guessing game because we don't know the unknown. You know what I mean? Like if anything, you'll be rewarded inshallah on the day of judgment, but like you don't even know when that's going to be. So like, you know, like basically like don't keep tabs. That's what I'm saying. Like that's what love for the sake of Allah is not. Like you shouldn't be keeping tabs of like what you're doing. You know what I mean? Because people are I think it's so toxic when people have that like, okay, there's the jar of like rewards. Like how many rewards do you have now in your jar? Like, do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
I
it's
think
really
it's so
strange.
toxic. Like a lot of people do that though, you know what I mean? Like they have that
Yeah,
but you know,
I think
okay,
it's
yeah, like
yeah.
it's better. I don't like to use this word, like, but it's better that, you know, you have sort of like an incentive to do something like it okay, like it's better to have an
Or
incentive.
more like a purpose, maybe.
Yeah.
Like you have a.
I mean, it's better
I don't
to
know.
like want reward from Allah than like to do it for your own personal gain. Like, let's just say that, you know.
Yeah, you're
But
not trying to get. It's better than trying to like get position in the community, or you're trying to
yeah,
get people to notice you or something.
exactly.
Yeah, it's better than that, but it's still better to do it without
Like
that.
exactly, like solely for the sake of Allah. That's it means that you're doing it because you love Allah and you want him to be pleased with you. And like you said, that in itself is a reward. That's like an amazing reward, you know? So going off of what I just said, love for the sake of Allah is not keeping tabs about what you've done for someone and then revisiting those tabs and using it as a reminder for yourself, whether you should do something for someone or not. So you mentioned this as well. For example, like I did this last time and they didn't do anything, so I won't do anything again for them. Like that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's not love for the sake of Allah. Really?
Well, people in my family who are like that too would be like, oh, for sure. It's like, oh, well, you didn't respond when I said happy birthday, so I'm never gonna do anything nice for you. Like, okay, I don't need it.
Oh
That's the
God,
thing is
so
too,
funny.
is like with especially other Muslims, I'm like, if you're not doing it for the sake of Allah, don't do it for me. I'm good.
Yeah, we don't
Like,
need
I don't
that
need your
kind
help.
of. Yeah, exactly. You know what it is too? Like now that I just thought about it, like Allah doesn't need us to do things for his sake. You know what I mean?
This is true.
Like
Yeah.
you're doing it for the sake of Allah. It's for your own like goodness. It's not like Allah needs us to like give sadaqah or you know, it's not like Allah needs us to like help that family. No, you know, we need to like just not think that like we're doing people a favor. Do you know what I mean? Because Allah is ultimately using us to do good, and that's the most important thing. You know what I'm saying? So that's like that ties in with the first one, like payback, keeping tabs. That is not love for the sake of Allah. Love for the sake of Allah is not saying you love them. But then when problems arise or misunderstanding or miscommunication arises, your actions are like opposite of your speech. So, for example, you tell someone you love them for the sake of Allah, and then when you have an issue with them and you approach them, and then if they respond in a manner you didn't expect or like you completely cut them off. That's not love for the sake of Allah. Like, don't say you love someone for the sake of Allah if that's what you're going to do. Cut them off if there's problems. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry
I feel
to
like
cough.
sometimes we do it because it's the easier thing for us or something.
Yeah. Because, you know, some
Not
people
'cause it's
obviously
actually
are not
good.
mature enough to deal with confrontations or they don't like confrontations.
Or the opposite. There's like keeping friends that are extremely toxic just because you feel like you're doing it for the sake of Allah when they're actually like harming your religion.
Well, then that's not for the sake of Allah. Like, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Love for the sake of Allah is not saying you love them for the sake of Allah, but then you betray them and then you can't apologize sincerely. And then you also cut them off and you act rude and spiteful. So that is not love for the sake of Allah. Like, don't tell someone, like, that's a thing, right? Like, don't tell anyone you love them for the sake of Allah if you can't keep true to your word. Like, just don't say it then. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I feel like some people, like, they really, like, abuse this phrase.
Yeah. And then also, like, don't say it. I feel like people will say it, especially, like, with new Muslims. Like, oh, I love you for the sake of Allah. I'm here if you need anything. And then, like, they're nowhere to be found when the person actually needs help.
Exactly. Like, they're gone missing. And it's like, oh, well, you said you loved me for the sake of Allah. Like, where the heck are you? You know what I mean?
Exactly. And then that really, like, breeds, like, distrust with other Muslims for that person.
Yeah. And then they just close themselves off and don't want friends.
Pretty much.
Okay. And then, so love for the sake of Allah is not professing what you feel at that moment, So basically like what I just said, and then not following through. So like some sisters get like emotional, and because, for example, you do something that they love and that pleases them, so in that moment they say they love you for the sake of Allah. But when something goes wrong and you do something they don't like, because like obviously we're all humans, right? And we have our own shortcomings, so obviously we're gonna make mistakes. But it's like they can't overlook that. Like they don't look at the good that you did. They just look.
That's
at
like the thing I was mentioning at the beginning is like you're not thinking good of that person.
Yes.
Like you're just assuming the worst in that circumstance. Like you said you love them for the sake of Allah, but you're not showing it.
Yeah, just because they did something for you, you say you love them for the sake of Allah, but then like they did something, for example, like something that you didn't like or agree with, and then you just like you cut them off or something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the last point is love for the sake of Allah is not just lip service, it's not just all talk. Like I feel like a lot of the times subhanallah, like Allah tests our love for someone for his sake to prove if we are sincere. You know, like most of the times what I've noticed is like a lot of Muslims have told me that they love me for the sake of Allah, but to be honest, their actions like speak louder than words. And it's like, what does it even mean to love someone for the sake of Allah? Like, what is the, subhanAllah, what is like the 2022 version? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like if you can't even be bothered to like give them salams every now and then, or like check on them or something, like I don't feel like that's really truthful. Maybe you love the idea of them.
That's it. You nailed it. You love the idea. You love what they did for you because it pleases or pleased you. You know what I mean? But as soon as they don't please you, you don't love them anymore for the sake of Allah. Like it's not something you just throw around. It's not a phrase. Like it's not a phrase, right? A phrase is
that's
just
actually like something I was gonna
throw it around.
It was like a saying of a companion, and it was saying that Darda radiallahu anha narrated that Abu Darda radiallahu anhu had 360 close and beloved friends whom he loved for the sake of Allah, and he would supplicate for them in the prayer. So it's like if you're not even gonna make dua for that person, like are you really loving them for the sake of Allah?
Yes, that's actually really important too. A good reminder.
For all of us.
For all of us. I mean, this episode's like a huge reminder for myself. Okay, so
we definitely, I mean, I feel like we have to like work on we always have to work on friendships and anything where we say we love someone for the sake of Allah.
Yeah.
Like we should try to be the best in that regard because we're doing it for our creator.
Exactly. And like subhanallah, well, I'll leave that for the final thoughts, but let's talk about how do you think you or I okay, let's talk about you. How do you think you can love someone for the sake of Allah sincerely? Like, how would you work on that? Because it's not that easy, you know what I mean? It's like, a lot of people, we, including ourselves, like we throw it around loosely.
Yeah. I think that we have to first work on how we love Allah, and
that's nice.
I mean, like I think like developing our tawheed, and I know it's like kind of like the answer for everything because it is everything. Yeah. Like it's everything. We need it to breathe, like to live. So, you know, like I feel like that we have to understand how to love Allah in order to love for the sake of Allah. So I think that like, you know, listening to classes and Islamic reminders and reading for me, that reading about like the seerah helps a lot. Things like that, like that the Allah sent the Prophet ﷺ like as a mercy for mankind. Like these kind of things like increase my love for Allah. So I feel like when you have that, I mean, I feel like having a higher iman in general also helps you because I feel sometimes when we get like a low, this personally, I feel like when my iman is low, I feel like people are more, I don't know, maybe this is like paranoid too, but people are out to get me, or people are like they don't like me or things like that. So it's like harder to love them for the sake of Allah because my iman is low. So I feel like if I have a better, like I'm doing what I'm keeping all my prayers and I'm, you know, trying to read more Quran and stuff. Like I feel like my appreciation of people is better. that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense.
What about you? I mean, I'm sure I have more I could say, but that's like the main thing. So
No, that's really good. Everyone has their own way of like how they can work on their love for the sake of Allah sincerely. You know what I mean? For me, I definitely think so what I found that I really need to do constantly is to make dua.
Yeah. That's so true.
Like that's my number one.
Easy to become complacent with that.
Yeah. I mean, even
so
sincerely making dua, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And sincerely believing that your dua will be answered.
Yes,
so,
yes,
this 100%. Is important aspect of making dua.
Right, for sure. Like,
because if you just say it and you're like, it's not going to happen, then like,
then don't say it. Like,
what are you?
Exactly. Yeah, so I think I need to constantly make dua and like ask Allah for sincerity with everything I do, and ask for sincerity and blessings in my relationships. I also think that making dua for those who I love for the sake of Allah is always important. Like you mentioned, absolutely. Right?
Yeah.
In order to do all of that, like you mentioned, like being aware that like you're making sincere dua, so self-awareness is very important for me. And self-awareness means for me like constantly self-reflecting, asking myself questions, reminding myself, shifting perspectives and stuff like that. So like, is it really for the sake of Allah if I react this way or that way, or if I cut people off? You know what I mean? That being said, of course, like I don't just say I love you for the sake of Allah to any random sister online. And we shouldn't be doing that anyways. You know what I mean? I feel like when you say you love someone for the sake of Allah, like that's a trust, you know?
Yeah.
That's like a manna. You're saying a heavy, like that's a heavy thing to say. Because with that
you
comes
can say something different. Like you can say something like, I love my Muslim brothers and sisters for the sake of Allah. Something like more general.
I mean, I feel like now I'm at the point where I'll only say if I mean it. Like if I'm willing to work on the relationship. So do you know what I mean? I mean, that's just for me. Like whatever. Like people, they, you know, if like they can say it.
So I'm very like picky about it with like adults, especially. I don't like as a teacher. I feel like for me, I love like my like younger kids, students, like for the sake of Allah. Like they're so like innocent, and it's just a different thing with adults.
Yes. It is. It really is. Like that's what I'm saying. Like I don't just say to anybody online, like any random sister, like, you know what I mean? Like if I say it, it means I really mean it. Like I should mean it, and I strive to improve on the relationship with whoever I love for the sake of Allah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I just feel like it's really important to keep that sincerity in dua and make dua for like you to be able to sincerely love someone for the sake of Allah. I mean, that's like a really good reminder for myself, honestly. Final thoughts. What's your final thoughts, Sissy Fatima?
So I have a quote that's not really my final thought, but I mean, it's the final thought that I had, but it's not my words.
Let's see if we have the same one.
So it's from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, that the reality of Tawheed is that one does not love except for the sake of Allah, and he loves what Allah loves for the sake of Allah, and he does not hate except for the sake of Allah. And so it's kind of showing that anything we do should be for the sake of Allah, which, you know, makes sense, but it's definitely, as we mentioned a few times, harder in practice to accomplish. So I think we just have to work on really understanding what that is, and that like I mentioned, like tawheed, and understanding why we're loving them for the sake of Allah and not for some other reason.
Always ties back to tawheed. I mean, everything, like our existence as a Muslim, it ties back to tawheed. You know what I mean? And I mean, tawheed is not just something that it's not just like la ilaha illallah. Like, you know, there's depth and there's depth to that, you know.
Absolutely.
You need to really understand what we're professing.
And it takes like years, honestly.
Oh yeah, like I'm only
and we
realizing.
Still have work. I mean, we probably both still have a lot of work. So.
Oh yeah. I'm just
kind of probably a lifelong.
I'm just like understanding. I'm just understanding what Tawheed truly means, like in the heart now. Like, you know what I mean? And that's like what, like maybe 12 years later, subhanallah.
Yeah. Because there's always like the theoretical too, and then there's what you actually are able to put into practice.
Right, and the spiritual and everything. And it's just it is a journey. So don't think like you have it all figured out at the beginning. You know what I mean? Because Allah will show you that you don't. Allah will show you don't.
You're majorly humbled.
SubhanAllah.
Also, I've noticed I've been very much like when I start deviating away from doing something for the sake of Allah, or like especially in terms of like people and loving people for the sake of Allah, and I start not having the right intention, things go off track really quickly.
Really?
I feel like they do. Yeah.
Well, that's good though. That's like means okay, you need to like get back on track, you know?
So what were your final thoughts?
My final thoughts. I had this really beautiful quote by Ibn al-Qayyim, rahimahullah. And so I'm gonna say it, and here it is. There's a difference between one who says he loves you with his tongue, but there is no indication from his actions, and one who is silent, doesn't speak, and you see the indications from his acts, all of them professing his love for you. I think that just basically sums up what we've talked about today. So my final thoughts going off of that, this segment is definitely a reminder to myself first and foremost. I think it's really easy to get sidetracked and often like forget what loving for the sake of Allah truly means when our emotions and our ego get involved. I think it's important, like for me, to always remember that everything is a test in this life, and that my relationships with others is no different. So they're also a test, you know? So I mean, I'm not free from being tested. Like, I'm not free from people being a test for me. Do you know what I mean? Like,
for sure.
So I'd rather not say that I love someone for the sake of Allah if I can't fulfill their rights and live up to its meaning, like what we were talking about earlier. Like, I'd rather not do that than to say it loosely with no meaning and no, like, not following it up with actions.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? Because like it's definitely easier said than done. So if it's easier said than done, then I'd just rather not say it. You know what I mean? Because I think like when you truly love someone for the sake of Allah, like it shows, and you understand that in that relationship you want to preserve it and nurture it and always work on it to please Allah. And you want it to be like a meaningful relationship with that person whom you are loving for the sake of Allah. Like, it's actually pretty deep when we reflect on that, you know? Like, loving someone for the sake of Allah it's actually an honor, because it's something that like Allah loves, and in return Allah will love us for doing it. So I think it's really important to always remember that. And I found some really beautiful reminders that I wanted to share along with my final thought, and these are pretty well known, but I'm going to share them anyways because the reminders benefit the believers. So this is verily Allah will say on the day of resurrection, where are those who love each other for the sake of my glory? Today I will shelter them in my shade on a day when there is no shade but mine, which you actually said today as well. You mentioned that earlier. And then another one, so that's Sahih Muslim. Another one is, Allah Almighty said, my love is a right upon those who befriend each other for my sake. My love is a right upon those who defend each other for my sake. Al-Mujam Al-Saghir. Sahih, according to Al-Albani. Next one, no two men love each other for the sake of Allah behind their backs, but that the most beloved of them to Allah has the strongest love for his companion. I think that's so beautiful. Al-Mu'jam Al-Awsat. Sahih, according to Albani. Like, I don't really have to actually read the sources, but like, you know, we might have some people who are like hardcore with that, so I just include it anyways. But yeah, those are my final thoughts. And I think like our friendship has actually come a long way. Subhanallah. I feel like our friendship has and may Allah always protect it, bless it, and preserve it. I mean, but I feel like we both have our differences and we both have our like really bad habits, but we've really come a long way with like overlooking that and sort of trying to understand each other for the sake of Allah, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's really like has shown me that like I feel like our friendship really is for the sake of Allah.
Yeah, I feel that
inshallah,
too.
like we're not, it's not fake. Like,
yeah, it's not like, you know, I don't
it's not performative or something.
Yeah. I mean, okay, like yes, at the beginning we were like overzealous and maybe like, you know, we're obviously still growing. So maybe like along the way, like it could have been performative or it could have been like keeping tabs or counting tabs, whatever. But I think like as we grow as a Muslim, you know, obviously our perception and our mentality grows along with that. So we do learn eventually like what is truly loving for the sake of Allah. You know what I mean? And there's so many times like we could have cut each other off. And there's actually many times we don't talk to each other. Like we don't talk to each other daily. But when we talk to each other, like it's very meaningful. And I never think that you're like one of those who like, oh, she doesn't like keep in touch with me or like she doesn't check how I'm doing. Like I'm going to cut her off. Like I never feel that.
No, I always feel like we both have like busy lives and
yeah,
we
and
live
it's like
halfway across the world.
Exactly, our time zones are different, but like when we do like message, like I feel like your family, like alhamdulillah, like you know what I mean.
I agree, alhamdulillah.
Like family, you don't need to keep in touch with like every time, but when you do message them, it's like, oh hey, like it's like not, it's like we didn't not talk for like a week or something.
Yeah, it's really true. SubhanAllah.
Yeah, I think like with maturity, emotional maturity and spiritual growth, like you'll really recognize who you love for the sake of Allah. Like you'll see what that actually means, you know? Yeah.
Jazakallah khair for that.
Yeah, sissy. So this was short and sweet, inshallah beneficial. Inshallah. So yeah, I guess anything else to add to that?
I don't think so, but I think it'll be a nice episode to discuss on the Instagram and stuff. Like,
yeah, for sure. Stories.
Reflecting on, inshallah, what it means to everybody.
Yeah, we'd really love to know your thoughts and how you feel about that. How you feel about it. Inshallah. Okay, so that's it for today's episode. This is Khadija and Fatima signing off. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.